So I have a quick question.
Do you like numbers? How about some numbers? You want some more numbers? Who's up for just all of the numbers?
Because you're about to get all of the numbers.
Hello, my fellow sorcerers! Did somebody say Ice Shards? Haha! I knew somebody did! Look, the point is, there is a lot of fun and power to be had behind, well, nearly every one of Sorcerer's skills this season. They are all more powerful than they have ever been by far, and it's a little bit of a shame that some absolute ridiculous builds are being a little bit overshadowed by Ball Lightning, which, yes, is the supreme king when it comes to damage. But Ice Shards does have it beat in one distinct and important category, while also not really being very far behind at all on said damage. And that category is perhaps obviously range, but not just being able to delete every enemy on the next screen from a mile away in a chain infinite frozen explosion, a reaction that just deletes everything before you've even laid eyes on it, though that does certainly happen all the time here. It's the safety that that range brings. This build, more than any other, is what you want if you are wanting to push hard content, especially towards that T100 Nightmare dungeon, because you just kind of can't die because nothing ever gets to walk near you, because again, you've already sniped it from half a mile away with the Ice Shards. And it's not a case of having to aim at each individual enemy. This is the evolved Season 2 version of my spreading endless auto-kill freeze Ice Shards that let you just attack one enemy, freeze it, that freeze will spread to all the other enemies, your Ice Shards will start bouncing between them all, they will all explode in damage when they die, and you don't ever have to really worry or think about. You just, well, do this faster than you ever have, by the way, in Season of Attack Speed, vaguely in the direction of the thing you want dead, and I guarantee you, thing will be dead, and all of the thing around the thing, very, very quickly. All while having, of course, infinite mana. I mean, you're seeing it, right? Just kind of the sheer ranged killing power is absurd, and it's so satisfying and fun to play. Just watching that utter machine gun hurl out and just seeing all of the dots disappear down the corridor into the next room, it really, really works something fierce. There's also a few other sneaky little combinations going on, even a dabble into Overpower, which works shockingly well with Ice Shards now, and generally, it has never been better than it is in Season 2, and if this build had existed in the way it does now in Season 1 or Season 0, it would be unquestioningly the best Sorcerer build, and arguably just the best build in the game. And talking of the best build in the game, we still do take a little bit of essence of Ball Lightning here. See, Ice Shards is both a crit and lucky hit machine, which means the Ball Lightning enchant, as I'm sure you've been seeing, just so consistently happens that you will shoot through a group of enemies and every single one of them will near instantly spawn a Ball Lightning underneath them before freezing, trapping it in an icy electrified tomb before shortly it gets deleted. It's so good. There are times where this produces more Ball Lightnings on screen than actual Ball Lightning, and I think that is really amusing. And it also does a really solid job of chunking through bosses too, especially as I have a variation of this specifically for bosses to share with you as well. Essentially, if you like Ice Shards, if you want to use it, if you want a really powerful, in fact, the most powerful long-range safe build, well, you are in for a treat. Let's do this. Skill tree. Look, sometimes I just want to try a musical approach, and I'm not sorry. We begin then with your 2 points in Firebolt, both to get to your cause, and because, well, yeah, you guessed it, in a build all around critting constantly and as hard as possible, we still can't really beat the Firebolt enchantment and its synergy with Devouring Blaze and the Burning Instinct board, of which we will be taking major advantage of both. Then we get to said cause, where you'll go all in on Ice Shards as the star of the show, and then enhanced, and then you can either choose what you would like here. Essentially, it's slightly more reliable vulnerable, though we do have a lot of vulnerable without this, or slightly less vulnerable uptime, like 80% versus 100%, but you get the barrier bonuses. I've gone for the vulnerable, but as I say, you can choose either. 3/3 into potent warding to not get blown up by blowy up things, and then over to your defensives. We just want Flame Shield, so just get Flame Shield. We want Teleport over to the damage reduction, very important for survival, though less important in Ice Shards as we won't be constantly just throwing ourselves at groups of enemies, but it's still very nice to have. Then we just want Ice Armor, so grab that too. Fill up Glass Cannon, we're very safe at range, so this build perhaps more than any other can really get away with this, and then just 1 rank in attunement, so it can happen, and happen it will, as this build is all about lucky hit. Then we go down to Conjuration. Get 3/3 in Precision for even more lucky hit, and then get the usual double defensives of a permanent 21% damage reduction and barriers every time we press one of our cooldowns. One of said cooldowns then being Lightning Spear. We get this as it's just a lot more useful to us than having Frost Nova on our bars. We're really far away from enemies all the time, so we don't have very many opportunities to use it effectively. We also don't need the mana, and we don't need the vulnerable, so we would rather have a Lightning Spear flying around that is stunning everyone and dropping more ball lightnings on them, and generally giving us more CC to spread. It's just very nice to have. It's also another defensive layer, because a stunned enemy isn't killing you. Over to your Mastery, where we get Inner Flames, just to get that 3/3 Devouring Blaze for even more critical strike damage, and then 5 into Ball Lightning, and just enhanced, as this does work from the enchant summoned ones, and the other 2 don't. And yes, it is our second enchantment slot. We are going to crit essentially with everything we ever do. We also have a massive amount of lucky hit. So, as I said at the start, this just happens on every enemy constantly all of the time, and it is magnificent. A field of lightning for your ice to fly across. Then we go down here and get the usual quad ice passives, all of which phenomenal for any given ice build, really. Permafrost, Hoarfrost, the extra mana from Frigid Breeze comes in very handy, and then Icy Touch too. Just Deep Freeze, so we have a cooldown on our bars, give you a little breather. Once we've summoned Ball Lightnings on every enemy, we can just pop into our block and wait for them to melt if we're in a particularly bad situation, but we don't really need Primer Supreme, and I really need the points elsewhere, so I've chosen to save them here. But if you really want them, well, you have a look and decide where you want to lose the 2 points. This is a very tightly done build. Lastly then, our key passive is Shatter. We are freezing every enemy on screen all of the time, so them exploding for the massive amounts of damage they take just cleaves everything so effortlessly, and it is beautiful to watch. So, there you have it then. Let's get to how this flows. So obviously, you've got your emergency flame shield, I don't want to die anymore button. You've got big long barrier and ice armor, just an extra cooldown to keep you going. Press your lightning spear on cooldown to stun the room and summon more ball lightnings. And then you want to teleport to move through the dungeon faster, yes, but also a little bit more defensively. If I'm in a room full of enemies, I will teleport to the corner of the room and then just ice shard from out of it in my new little lovely turret position, and I'm very happy with that. And yes, use your block when there's lots of ball lightnings everywhere and you just want to have a little bit of a breather for a few seconds. The main thing to to go over then is actually how the Ice Shards does such effective killing of everything with this setup. But in order to do that, I first need to talk our gear and aspects and uniques and all of that loveliness, so we will do exactly that. But generally speaking, just be as far away from the enemies you're killing as possible, and just keep machine gunning Ice Shards in their direction, and don't stop until everything isn't moving anymore. We also do, of course, as you might expect, have Tybalt's Will, so both Flame Shield and Teleport are mana on demand. Boom, and then we'll spend some more, and once more, boom, looking very, very nice. So, yes, let's get gear out the way, and then we will go over the magic at play. For your weapon, well, we want Aspect of Control. We're stunning and freezing everything, so this is just a huge, nice damage increase. Then on our focus, and you do very specifically want a wand because we want the lucky hit chance, so bear that in mind. Then for our focus, we have got the required piercing cold, so our Ice Shards do said piercing and can cleave down enemies. On your ring, you want the attack speed accelerating from critting with your Ice Shards. This is just a huge permanent attack speed steroid, which is lovely. On your necklace then, this is where Elementalist is going to go. A extra 60% crit chance is rather lovely, and this takes us to 100% for just permanent crits. So given that we are permanently critting, and our lucky hit chance is sitting at a lovely 45%, and we have that Ball Lightning enchant, well, essentially, every enemy we hit has a 12.5% chance to spawn a Ball Lightning underneath them. And that might not sound high, but that's actually ludicrous. I mean, this by itself is 5 instances of damage. Obviously, we have to account for the actual skills lucky hit modifier too, but this is why we get such a ridiculous amounts of Ball Lightning. Then on your helmet, you want Shared Misery. This is required, it is important. This means that when we hit our frozen enemy from Ice Shards, they will spread that freeze to everyone else on screen. We have so much lucky hit, so this just constantly and quickly takes hold. On your chest is where our Disobedience goes to get that much needed armor, so something random doesn't kind of just one-shot you. And you might be thinking, whoa, not raiment? Yeah, well, we're staying really far away from enemies. We don't want to teleport on top of them. We are playing it from very far away, so this is one of the few situations where raiment doesn't actually make the mandatory gear list. Now, don't get me wrong. If you are doing really easy or your level stuff, feel free to throw it on, but it's certainly not needed. Then, let's talk uniques. Firstly, Esu's Heirloom, the movement speed, amazing, the mana cost reduction helps with your Ice Shard spam, and the crit chance and crit damage is exactly what we need here. Tybalt's Will to be our mana generator and just a big permanent damage increase. We essentially just use Teleport and Flame Shield almost on cooldown to generate 50 mana per press, and it really keeps us going, especially in bosses. This is honestly just the unique of the season, really. It is too good to pass up. Then we have Frostburn. Its buffed, changed affixes are now so divine for this build, and it was already worth using before, because that lucky hit chance to freeze is what powers everything. You want that Ice Shards to freeze the enemy you have chosen, and you want it to happen quickly so that Shared Misery can take over, start spreading it to everyone else. It's so effective. Lastly then, we have this. So, Blue Rose is admittedly just okay. It's here as a placeholder. See, while you are seeing this a couple days after the new Malignant rings have come out, it is being made a couple days before they come out. So, Blue Rose, while it does do work, the mana cost reduction is nice, the lucky hit chance is nice, the critical strike damage is nice, and you will summon Ice Spikes constantly because of your lucky hit, you want to replace this with the new Rashas unique ring, and you will have even better results than what you have already seen so far. So Blue Rose works great and is better than any other random aspect that we've not chosen, but the new unique ring will be even better, so if you do have it already, then replace Blue Rose with Rashas. So, talking gems, you want your crit damage to vulnerable in your weapons, your health in your armor, and your armor in your jewelry. When it comes to affixes, you want the following: critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, mana cost reduction, resource generation, chance to restore primary resource, attack speed, critical strike damage, cooldown reduction, and then after that, ranks to defensives, to devouring blaze, to mastery, ranks to ice shards, which will be relevant in a moment, and all of your kind of vulnerable damage, damage to faraway enemies, intelligence after that. So you might notice I've got quite the array of gear here at the bottom of my inventory. That's because everything I have just shown you is the setup for clearing a dungeon, for killing lots of weak enemies and packs of elites and so on and so forth. And it does that in the following way. So when we launch our ice shards, the enemy will get frozen thanks to Frostburn. The next follow-up ice shards then will freeze every other enemy on screen thanks to Shared Misery. Now all the enemies are frozen, ice shards will be bouncing off the frozen enemies, hitting other enemies. Every enemy on screen is now being hit by ice shards in some way, shape or form, and they are now frozen. They are now also getting a ball lightning generated underneath them, while of course they're also set on fire. So everyone is locked down and dying, they die, they trigger shatter, they blow up, and it's this delicious chain reaction that endlessly propagates. And that's how it all comes together to do it, with everything else just amping up the damage to 11. It really is one of my best and proudest synergies, and I think it's just so cool, all hinging on that Frostburn starting this freeze chain, and then how well that works with Shared Misery. But, as I said, everything here is you're clearing through a nightmare dungeon setup. When you get to bosses, well, it gets a little bit more interesting. But before we cover the boss setup, let's talk the vampiric powers for this one. You want to have Domination, of course, it's just a big damage increase to Frozen and Stunned, of which everything is all of the time. We want Accursed Touch, both to keep up our vulnerable uptime, to apply vulnerable to everything that Ice Shards isn't hitting, and to just spread the vulnerable on top of that, and hey, the ghost damage isn't bad. We want Prey on the Weak for even more vulnerable damage, and that Vampiric Curse equals vulnerable, and then Ravenous for a permanent passive massive boost to your attack speed that gets even higher in combat too. This is why this season really starts to get ridiculous with how fast you shoot Ice Shards. Now, you may be looking at Infection here and being like, what? This is such like a meh weak vampiric power. And you would be right if not for the new ring Rashas that, as I say, you want to replace Blue Rose with. Once you have Rashas ring on, this becomes ridiculous because it is poison damage, which counts as an element type of damage, which gets you an extra stack of Rashas permanently up, so you have 4 stacks. Lightning from your spear and your ball lightning, your fire from both Flame Shield and the enchant, and then ice, of course. This adds poison, so this actually reads, give yourself an extra permanent 15% multiplicative damage on top of, yeah, the little bits of actual poison explosion damage. And in that context, it is now super good. So now you have seen that, let's talk what you do when you are about to face a boss, either at the end of a dungeon, or a unique boss, or Uber Lilith. What we want then is to quickly go to your skill tree, get rid of Shatter, which doesn't really help against bosses unless there's a billion ads, and go for Avalanche. Helps smooth out the mana curve, and the extra damage is also neat too. That's all you change there. Then when it comes to gear, you want to get the Banished Lord's Talisman. This is where playing with Overpower comes into it. We are critting 100% of the time, so when we guarantee an Overpower, we guarantee a crit Overpower that is 108% multiplicative stronger. That chunks bosses. It is so sublime to have an Ice Shard under this boost. So you put that on. However, you have now lost Elementalist, so we want that back. So this is where you have a spare ring with Elementalist, and ideally with resource generation, and we swap it for our accelerating ring, which we give up on for bosses and just don't have the accelerating aspect. Then we also don't need Shared Misery because there's nothing to spread against a boss, so we put on something like Godslayer Crown for even more damage and just more useful effects. Finally, we don't care about the lucky hit freeze against bosses because although it builds up their stagger really fast, we can do a lot more damage if we swap to this. Just a nice pair of gloves with ranks of Ice Shard, attack speed, crit, primary resource, and then the conceited aspect. So whack them on, and now you are geared for bosses. Remember that this is Rashas. Then we go to our Vampiric powers, we get rid of Domination, because yes, it works great against stagger, but bosses spend most of the time not staggered. So we replace it with Blood Boil to get another Overpower at least every 20 seconds, which adds to the Banished Lord synergy, and works really nicely for this in a boss-killing manner. So right now, you're in boss setup. This way of gearing, this Vampiric power swap, and the little swap of key passive. It's kind of impossible to make Ice Shards that is really good against clearing enemies in a dungeon, and really good against bosses. You can kind of do one or the other, so this is the best way to have both. It just means spending 20 seconds swapping some gear before you walk into a boss room, and I know that can be a little bit irritating, but hey, at least it does give you your cake and the ability to eat it too. So, let me quickly swap back to the default build and talk how we end up with infinite mana. Obviously, the actual Ice Shards themselves only costing 16 from all our mana cost reduction is a huge help. All of our resource generation means our mana comes back very nicely. We've got our Tibalt's Will giving us big bursts of mana whenever we Flame Shield or whenever we teleport. And then you have got this happening all the time because enemies are always vulnerable and we have so much lucky hit chance. And then you just add in a little bit of helpful chance to restore primary resource, and it really is that simple. We're hitting so many enemies all of the time that our mana generation is way, way higher than how much we're actually spending, despite firing them faster than ever, thanks to all the attack speed we have. So, the Paragon tree then is what's left, and you'll be glad to know that it is identical whether you're killing a boss or you are clearing hordes of enemies. And it is a complete Paragon tree that I can show you because, yes, I am finally level 100, so that is lovely too. We begin then with the beginning board, because of course we have to, and you just want to match me point for point as we go, but the highlights of course are getting the rare nodes, getting all of the non-physical damage that we can, and then your first glyph is Elementalist, essentially another mini Rashas, and we will be doing all three types of damage consistently, so it's just a really nice increase on top of amping up the non-physical damage node, which is hugely beneficial. I cannot express enough how important getting as much +% non-physical damage as possible it is for any given sorcerer build. And talking of non-physical damage, that's why our next board is Enchantment Master for the trifecta of Elemental Balance, Elementalist, and then Ruinous. So get these in this shape, all of the magic nodes that I have gotten, and you'll notice that I do have a few less maximum life nodes in this build because, well, we're really safe at range, so we actually don't need as many defensive Paragon points, and it's another advantage to playing like this. Then we get our second glyph, which is going to be reinforced. The amping to the non-physical damage, obviously great, and then the constant 15% damage reduction as we constantly have a barrier is also very great. Then we move up and right into our next board, which is where the burning synergy comes in with your burning instinct. Come straight down and get yourself cinders along with smoldering embers for a little bit of extra damage reduction. Though I don't have these two because, again, we need all the points we can get offensively and we don't need the extra help defensively with the range. Here is where destruction goes. You want this as high a level as you can get, and you want to get every single bit of dexterity you can to power it up. And then quickly come out up here to get kindling in the surrounding nodes for another large boost. Then we go down into our next board, which is going to be your Icefall board. This double 30% multiplicative damage to frozen enemies is huge, and even just the 15% is really nice. It's a strong legendary node for this setup. But first, go down, get the extra damage to chilled enemies, and even more non-physical damage. Then we go left and get more damage to chilled enemies. A frozen enemy also counts as chilled, so this does very much help. And then we go down to the glyph, where it is going to be Flame Feeder. The main thing here is getting enough dexterity to activate the extra 10% damage to burning enemies, but also just pumping the general more damage to burning enemies is very worthwhile too, alongside getting the damage reduction from chilled enemies, mainly to get to even more dexterity. Then we can go back to where we forked off here, go down to the right, get Keeper of Winter. A little bit more damage reduction is certainly welcome, and then we go down here to get Icefall, which is, as I said, that really effective legendary node. Then we can go right, and before we go into the next board, go all the way down and get all of this extra percent cold damage, which is really good to have. Not only does this make you do more damage in general, it also powers up the legendary node on the next board, which is now going to be the Frigid Fate board, where we almost have the maximum 30% extra vulnerable damage to, well, vulnerable enemies. But first and foremost, we come in, we head down, get Oppressive and all of the nodes around it. Then we can head up to the glyph slot, which is going to be Adept for the extra size on Ball Lightning. We're summoning them everywhere, and this makes them do as much work as they can and amps their damage up. So make sure you get enough intelligence to make it happen by grabbing both Chilling and then going up to Weakness, continuing past it, curving round, and then we get Frigid Fate to finish things off. And that is your board. I'll give you a little bit of a slower go round so you can get a proper feel for it, and, well, you will feel it, because it is a very potent setup. And that then, ladies and gentlemen, is that. That is as good as Ice Shards gets in Season 2, and, well, it gets very good. I am really pleased with this. This went through a lot of iterations, a lot of tinkering, a lot of board and gear and skill setups until I reached this point. I was really happy with how it performed, and doing that little boss versus large groups of enemies switch enables it to shine so much brighter in both modes, as it were, and if you're going to go for it, I definitely would recommend having that extra set of gear for bosses. For now then, I hope you have indeed enjoyed this, and look forward to, well, what comes next, which is something I've been wanting to make work for the longest time, and I am so close to doing so. Like if you've enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.